Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to welcome everybody again. Thank you for coming out on this wonderful morning. I know it was difficult, so I greatly appreciate you all, every single one of you coming out to support and just share and learn as well. Before we even introduce, we're going to jump right into the presentation, but before we do that, I really would like Dr. Walter Cooper. He is a living legend and someone that I also listen to. His recall is amazing. He tells stories from 1930, and I'm like, wow. So I'm just really blessed that he's able to meet Jamaal. I called him yesterday. I did tell him about the event, but I called him yesterday, and his commitment to our community and our families is just amazing. So we have a school named after him in our community as well. So I'd just like for him to take a couple minutes and just say hello, and you know, he has to say something. So let's give him a hand clap. I
don't need that.
Okay.
Good morning and welcome to a beautiful Rochester morning in the middle of winter. We're accustomed to this. But I'm glad to be here and to share with you just for a few minutes our journey. I feel strongly that the worst form of child abuse is not to educate a child, because it has repercussions in the child's life in terms of opportunities, in terms of self-esteem, in terms of relationships with others, even within their own families. And so the mission before us is a very difficult one, but it's not insurmountable. And I know from my own personal life, I grew up in a family, I had 5 sisters and a brother. And my father had 0 days of education, and my mother had 9 years of education. But for some unknown reason, they intuitively understood the American dream that each succeeding generation should do better than the previous one. And the mechanism for that is education. So growing up in that kind of environment, you had to have a near-death experience not to go to school. That was demanded of you, and also a library card. 7 children, 5 sisters, 1 brother. My sister, who was 3 years older than I, taught me how to read before I went to school. So at my school, talking to 3rd and 4th graders, I always emphasized if they had younger siblings that they were an educator. They could teach their sisters or brothers the numbers, the letters, the alphabet, and so forth. And so I think what we have to do, and what I'm trying to convey, is that the family per se is the first learning center. And you share books and you share other aspects of living which has educational value. My oldest sister was a member of the Book of the Month Club in the late 1938. And I still remember one of the titles of the book she received. It was Vicky Baum, Shanghai 37. We had an unabridged dictionary in the house in 1948. Had no place to put it, so it sat on top of the washing machine. So I'm a firm believer in books. I tell the young people, the book shall set ye free. And that is what you need. Knowledge has to be the driving force in a very changing world for you. And it's international in scope. And I think if we know our history, we realize that many years ago, African Americans and others who were considered the other, besides their being Americans, could become educated in other places in the world. The emergence of the global economy was always a reality for African Americans, because when the early elevators of jazz. Lil Hardin, Buddy Bowman, Louis Armstrong, Sidney Bechet, and others were, their music which they played was described by music critics in this country as primitivism, not a true art form, but they continually honed and refined the music they were playing, and they called it jazz. But many of them had to go to Europe for a livelihood. Josephine, we all know the story of Josephine Baker in Paris in the 1920s. The writers went to Paris, and a situation which is not well known is that the jockeys who happened to be black rode horses in Europe because one of the most famous jockeys was a man named Isaac Bruce, who won 3 consecutive Kentucky Derbies. And then the sponsors of Kentucky Derby said, no more blacks. Jockeys will participate in Kentucky Derby. And so the successors to Isaac Bruce went to Poland, Russia, France, and England, and rode horses in those countries. So necessity has driven us to be part of an international economy. And if our children know a little of our history, they will understand that they can participate in an international economy. I don't want to take up too much of your time because I can talk forever, but I welcome you to Rochester, and those who live here understand the weather. Those who don't will get a better understanding of it if you stay around a few days. But thank you for coming. It's my pleasure to meet you.
I want to thank Dr. Cooper again. Give him another hand. You have really done a lot for this community. Good to have great leaders to share information with us, people that are very helpful to us and keep us going in the direction that we need to be moving towards. My name is Josh Mack. Those of you who don't know me, I'm an educator and community activist in this community for a very long time. One of my passions is what you're going to hear about today. We really have to assist our folks in the community, our parents, and everyone out here from supporting children with understanding the importance of embracing leadership, embracing knowledge, and embracing the information, and embracing people so that we can educate our children. One of the biggest obstacles that we have today, you all know it, is our parents are not involved at the level that they need to be involved in. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So I'm not going to get into those. Our speaker today will share with you. What we're looking for is not the reasons. We don't want to look for pointing fingers and blaming parents, but what we want to talk about is how we can educate our parents and give them the tools and resources that they need to be effective advocates so they can advocate for their child's education. My philosophy has always been that parents are the child's first and most influential educators and teachers, and if they don't have the tools that they need, guess what? It makes our job that much more difficult. So today you're going to hear from a presenter who's an educator, who's coming to us from the New York City area. He's an advocate for children and parents. He's proven in his field to be an expert in this area, and that's why we traveled all the way, despite all the obstacles. He said he was not going to be denied the opportunity to come and speak before us and share his knowledge with us. So he's had some success rates in his schools, and the 3 things I like the most about the success rate: high attendance, which we don't have that here in Rochester; low suspensions, we found a way to mask that here in Rochester; and extremely high parent involvement. And we found a way to turn our parents away from being involved at a high student high rate. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Jamaal Bowman.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Dr. Cooper, thank you for that address this morning. It's an honor to be here with you and an honor to be in your presence. Thank you. Please give a round of applause to Eileen Graham for putting this together. The first thing I want to say is parents are the the most important voice in education. Parents are the most important voice in public education. A few years ago, a colleague of mine and I were having a conversation about this, and one of the things he said was parents are the sleeping giant of education. Once parents begin to get involved in what's happening in the school district, and within the community, that's when you see a major shift taking place within your district and throughout the state. I'll give you one example of that. In 2013, the state of New York began to implement what they call the Common Core Standards. Now, it wasn't just the standards that were implemented, it was the standards along with high stakes testing, along with teacher evaluations, along with standardized curriculum. Because it was all implemented at the same time and so quickly, parents and teachers and schools were kind of caught off guard, and parents didn't really know what was going on. So parents began to ask questions of their teachers and of their local school districts. And the districts and the teachers didn't really have clarity. They didn't really have answers for these parents. So parents were like, wait a minute, you're implementing new standards, you're implementing a new curriculum. I can sense the anxiety and the fear happening in my child, but you don't have answers for me to explain what's going on. So parents began to push back against that. So in 2013, or maybe 2014, parents began to resist and refuse the state assessment, because they felt, listen, if you can't explain to me what's happening with my child and why it's happening, then I'm going to refuse. I'm going to resist. And that first year, I believe they got 80,000 parents to refuse the state assessment. 80,000 was a lot, but it wasn't really moving the needle in terms of politically. The following year, they got 200,000 parents to refuse the state assessment. Then everyone began to pay attention, not just here in New York State, but nationally. The year after that, 230,000 parents refused the state assessment, which led to the governor himself calling one of the parent organizers and asking them, what do you need from me? So it's that type of organized, collective, political movement and power that gets the attention of people who have historically ignored our communities, right? Not just about resisting state exams, but about, listen, I demand this for my child, in my district, in my school, period, end of story. And I'm gonna be back tomorrow to get an answer from you on this. And if you're not here tomorrow, I'm coming the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And it's not about individual parents doing this, it's about doing it collectively. It's about doing it collectively. What Dr. Cooper talks about, if our kids knew their history, Black and Latino history should be a core component of the curriculum. There should be no if or then or maybe. It shouldn't happen in some schools and not all schools. It should happen in every single school. The majority of the district is Black and Latino. Once our kids learn their history and their culture, they begin to build self-esteem and self-worth and self-confidence. And it's with that self-confidence that they begin to impact their own community once they graduate high school and graduate college. We have to rebuild our own communities, and it begins with how we educate our children. Once they have knowledge of self, the world becomes their oyster. And the globalized view is necessary. They have to understand that Rochester is not the only place in the world. They have to understand that New York State is not the only place. It's big, but it's not the only place. They should pursue opportunities for learning in California, in Georgia, in Israel, in Russia, in South Africa. They have to have a globalized view. And there are globalized curriculum that schools are implementing all over the country. You must demand from the school board a globalized curriculum. You must demand from the school board a curriculum in the history and culture of the students that are represented. And if they don't respond to you, guess what? You have to run for school board. And if you don't feel like running for school board right now, you got to tell your friend to run, and you got to support them and run.
Amen.
And if you don't want to run for school board, you got to be at that school every day, meeting with that principal, meeting with that assistant principal, meeting with those teachers, making sure they're doing right by your children. There's no excuse for Rochester to have reading levels under 10% in this district. That's no excuse. That's no excuse. What about a comprehensive approach to literacy instruction? There's a way to teach reading, writing,